Hello YouTubies, I'm Grant, this is the garage, this is Granty's Garage. Winter's coming back around and in this video I'm going to show you the tips and preparation steps to store a car for winter. Paying close attention to some of the nuances of the Porsche 986. I'm going to divide this video into sections. We're going to start with the exterior of the car and move on to the wheels specifically. We're then going to look at sort of, let's say, mechanical considerations. Then we're going to look at the battery. We're then going to look at the interior. And then we're going to look at factors that you might want to consider based on your own situation and circumstance. Let's get into it. In the first part of this guide, we're going to look at the exterior and the wheels and the considerations to make for those. So, considerations for the paintwork, first of all. Driving a car, it gets covered in dirt, grime, bird matter, and you don't want that sitting on the paint for a long period of time. The bird matter particularly could cause a lot of damage, so you're going to want to give the car a very good clean. Then you're going to want to make sure the car is dry. Personally, when I've given the car a wash, I use the air compressor, just blow compressed air all over it, blow all of the water out of the nooks and crannies. But you're not going to really, unless you really dry the car, want to wash it the day you're going to store it. You're going to want to do it at least the day before. Let it get dry. Let's not store any water or moisture in with the car. No matter whether you're keeping it inside or out. Let all the moisture get out, the water get out of the gaps and crevices. And then the really important step after that is to apply a wax or a sealant to the paint to just give it a layer of protection. Particularly if we're going to be using a cover on the car or such. And that's the first step. Clean your car. If you're fortunate enough to be storing the car inside and you want to cover it, the consideration you want to make is get a breathable cover. Avoid a plastic one. This will keep the dust off of the car as well as dirt and things like that, but also will allow moisture and things, air to move through it still, so that you're not going to end up causing boggy conditions, let's call it, or trapping anything unnecessarily in there. If you're going to be storing the car outside, you're going to want to get a weatherproof cover, and you're going to want to use some tie downs just to make sure that's going to be kept in place. The last thing I'd consider before we get onto wheels, tyres and that sort of stuff would just be rodent control. And there's a number of cars that use a particular type of insulation on the wiring that attracts rodents, as well as a car can make quite a nice shelter for them during the winter months. What you might want to think about as typical, more general examples for lots of cars, the exhaust and things like air intakes and intake areas generally. A good medium to deter them from, say, the exhaust pipes is steel wool, because they won't typically chew through that. Just make sure you remember to remove this when you take the car back out in, say, the spring. And then you can find whatever might be suitable, but like a wire mesh or such, to put perhaps into, on top of or behind your intakes, just to prevent rodents trying to find a little home in your pride and joy. Right, wheels and tyres, very important. A number of things are going to happen over a long period of time with the car sitting, as well as coupling that with cold temperatures. The first thing you're going to want to do is inflate your tyres to the upper threshold of what their limits should be. The reason for this is the cold air will cause them to depressurise, and when a car is sitting, the depressurisation in the tyres over time will cause flat spots because the weight of the car is sitting on the same part of the tyre for a long period of time. If you're able to, the ideal thing to do is actually lift the car up and put it on jack stands so the weight is not in the wheels to protect the tyres specifically. If you can't manage that, maybe you'll have some of the curved dollies. They tend to work quite well because that's not as flat a surface as the floor. But the overinflation of the tyres is what will prevent the misshapingness or flattening or flat spots in them more than anything else, aside from literally lifting the car off of them. While we're at the wheels, the other thing that you're going to want to do is chock them so the car isn't able to roll, because you are not recommended to leave the handbrake, the parking brake, the e-brake, whatever you call it where you're from, on while the car's sitting for a long time. This could cause over time that brake to bind and then be very, very difficult for it to loosen and come off in a couple of months' time when you're going to start driving the car again. So overinflate the wheels, lift the car if you can so it's not sitting on them, and chock them if it's sitting on them so that the car can't roll. Now, the best practice for looking after the engine whilst the car is being stored is change the oil. Put clean oil in it and change the filter before you store the car. This will remove the contaminants that are stored in that oil from the system. They're not going to be sitting in it for the periods of the time that the car will be sat still and not being turned over, not being warmed up, and it's always good practice to change your oil anyway. The other thing will be just top off the rest of your fluids. Washer fluid, brake fluid, that's typically best recommended to do before you store it so that we're not going to avoid any areas going dry. Now, for the fuel consideration, there is a lot of debate about this, but typically the best recommendation is to half fill your tank and then add a fuel stabiliser. You don't want to just leave fuel in the car for many, many months. That's not good for the fuel, it's not good for the car. But you also don't want to leave it empty because it will be pressurising under fumes and such. And you don't want to leave it full because there's no wiggle room for the car to do anything in that time. The temperatures affect things in the car, the ambient temperatures, more than maybe you consider. So half fill your tank with fuel and add some fuel stabiliser. There's many different brands, they all have their own recommendations about how much you put in, but that will stop the fuel going bad, and that's the best practice. Half fill, fuel stabiliser. The next thing we're going to talk about before we move into looking at the interior considerations is the battery. The option for what you do here will most likely be determined by what you have available to you, space, conditions, etc. As well as the type of car, potentially, because of headaches that can arise from specifics. I'm going to talk about one that affects the Porsche Boxster very shortly, but actually is the same problem for any car where the battery is accessed in an area that needs an electric switch to operate. And we'll come to that. I'll show you an awesome way to never deal with a lockout. So, you want to disconnect the battery, ideally, and have it not where you're storing the car, maybe in the house, and have it on a trickle charge. The cold is not good for batteries. However, that's not always an option for a lot of people. The best option will be to have the battery trickle charged for its own health. If you leave the battery, it will go dead. If batteries repeatedly go dead, the life of them diminishes. You'll get so much less use out of them. So hook up a trickle charger, leave the car charging on trickle for the period you have it stored. I'm going to show you what I do with mine, which allows me to not only lock the car, but prevents me ever worrying about if my battery did die. I'm not going to be locked out of getting to it to charge it and or change it because the switch is operated electronically. And let me show you this. Now, I have made a whole video, which I'll link below, on how I achieved this setup. Some of it is ever so slightly specific to this car, but that's more the locations than anything else. The theory of what I've done can apply to any car, that the release for wherever the battery is stored being electronic, the problem being if the battery dies, you cannot get to it to charge it. And you're normally fumbling around for emergency releases, or you're having bigger problems than that. So looking at the battery, you will notice I have an additional terminal attached to each of the terminals. A black one here on the negative and a red one on the positive. Now in this case, both of these run round and join, and they go through a grommet behind the battery, through the firewall and into the cabin. Now forgive me because this is very difficult to video, but that connector comes in, those connectors, come in to this singular connector inside the cabin down by the pedals. When not in use, I just tuck it up behind there and it lives there fine. Now what this means is I can charge the car here. So even if my battery is dead as a door now, absolutely flat, I can put charge in it through here, through the charger,
that will give it enough life that, well, eventually it will charge the battery, but I would be able to access it if I needed to change that battery. So I'm not faffing about with those emergency releases and any other problem that you might have from not being able to physically access the battery. Porsche 986 owners do, they normally, this happens to them once before they do something significant about it. Ask me how I know, and I thought this is the best option. To apply this to another car, simply run this similar connector from wherever the battery is to an easily accessible manual area. What I mean by that is I can get in the cabin even when the battery's dead with the physical key, and then I can plug the charger onto the battery and start charging the car. So that's how I do that. And the reason that this is even more helpful, or additionally helpful, is that when I run the charger, and especially if I'm storing it for the winter, we'll leave the windows cracked. We'll talk about that in a minute. I can run the charger out here and have it sit just normally on the roof of the car, charge the car, lock the car, and I'm still able to charge it. Whereas a lot of people, if they're charging straight onto the battery, are leaving the boot, or in certain cases, the bonnet, the frunk, the hood, whatever you call it where you're from, open, and therefore the car is unlocked, which is obviously potentially a security risk. So I can charge my car as well as lock it when I'm storing it at the same time. Hopefully no matter what car you've got, there's an idea for how you can best approach this yourself.
We now move on to the interior. Naturally, a couple of things to consider for this. Number one, moisture is your enemy. We'll come back to that. Give the interior a clean, remove anything perishable, anything electronic, and anything that might attract rodents to the inside. Hoover the carpets, and then keenly make sure you properly clean anything that your hands touch a lot, like the steering wheel, the controls, the gear stick, because these are the sites from which mold will probably start to grow. You also want to look at using something that captures moisture. If you have a completely dry garage, maybe this is less of a consideration, but generally speaking, it's good practice to put a moisture capturer in the vehicle. You can get these pillow type things that you can then microwave the moisture out of. You can get those plastic containers with the weird crystals at the top that capture moisture from the air, but just place that somewhere down low in the car to continuously draw moisture out of the air and keep it dry in here. The last thing you want is to come back to your car come springtime and find the interior has gone very mouldy. When you clean it, it's always a good idea to wipe everything down and treat your vinyls and your leathers particularly with a caring product. Just helps extend their life while you're in there. Make sure that they are clean and biological substances are not living on those surfaces. And that's what you want to do for your inside. Lastly, we come to the situations or the conditions. The ideal place to store a car for, say, longer term is a dry, temperature controlled garage or room, barn, shed, whatever it is you have. If you've got something like that, that's the best place to do it. If you have not, you can ultimately make preparations that are to do with every one of those elements that you aren't able to achieve. If your garage is maybe, say, slightly damp, then you can look at giving it a good clean out, drying it out. You can look at heating it. You could look at mildew and moisture captures within the room itself as well, and then also covering the car. You can also buy a completely encasing bubble for the car, which will keep it in an environment, but for most people, that's a little bit extreme. If you are not able to keep it inside, you're going to keep it outside. Make sure you get a suitable cover. Ideally avoid completely plastic ones. You want a weatherproof one, but ideally a breathable one, because that will help prevent the mold growing inside, and you could normally still get away with cracking the windows. Hopefully that's been a very helpful video. I wish you the best of luck storing your car over the winter for those of you that feel you need to. I'm not going to be storing mine because this is going to get driven unless it's snowing. And if you found that helpful and you own one of these types of cars, I make videos like this all the time, so consider subscribing to the channel. If this was helpful and there was a tip that you didn't know before or you found out from this. If you could give it a thumbs up, that would be much appreciated. And if there's anything you think I've missed, comment below and I'll make sure we get that comment to the top so that we can also share that with anybody else watching this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.